Imagine a vibrant discussion between people that includes both openness and critical thought in the pursuit of truth. The Purchasing Truth podcast is an experience, a journey, an exploration of the impact that negative messages in politics and the media have on our families, community, society, and nation. Join your hosts, Bill Stierle and Tom Hazard, to discover new concepts and language strategies that will reveal effective ways of establishing truth. This podcast series will tackle current events, leadership challenges, healthcare confusion, integrity in business, and many other areas that affect us all. Gain clarity and understanding of the various truth perspectives. Welcome to Purchasing Truth.
Welcome back to Purchasing Truth, everyone. I'm Tom Hazard here with Bill Stierle, and today we want to talk about a different kind of purchasing truth, really, Bill, what you call hijacking truth, and today through a particular lens of guilt, blame, and shaming, and then the cycles of such. Isn't that right?
Yeah, Tom, one of the biggest challenges regarding truth, as we've went over in our previous podcast, is that there's this perspective that people have about what's true. There's this perception about what people has as true, and the perception is a more of a limited truth, and then a perspective is larger. And then what happens is that if somebody wants to hijack truth, what they do is they proportionalize, either make it bigger or make it smaller. So I'm going to make it bigger, the great things that I've done, or I'm going to make it smaller, the bad things that I've done. So that's called proportionalizing truth. It's focusing on the illusion or the partial truth, and then I'm going to make it bigger or make it smaller. Depends how I would like my viewer to view the world. Isn't that weird?
That is very weird, and it's really frustrating, I would think. I mean, to me, it is the idea that truth can be so easily hijacked. Well, maybe that's not what I should say. I think I see truth being hijacked a lot,
Right.
but I'm frustrated that others don't recognize it or aren't as, frustrated by that.
Right. I think that's the thing that's most unsettling, Tom, is that once you get the person's perception hooked, and once you have their perspective moving in your direction, then all you got to do is proportionalize it. So if I want to amplify my enemy and start to look at the falsehoods or the frailties or of that, I'm going to make them bigger and smaller, even if it's not really true. I can assign something to that person to get them out of the game, to knock them out. And a small media message repeated over and over again is a big part of that hijacking process. It's called proportionalizing. I'm going to proportionalize this, that there is, just to take something out of the news today, there's no collusion. There's no collusion and minimal obstruction. Well, it's such a small, there's a mount. Was a mountain. It looked like it was a mountain, but it's really a mouse. That's proportionalizing. And then they'll usually follow that with a reward. Look at how good we've done. Look at how far we've done. And then they'll put an anticipation. Look where we're going. It's going to be great when we get there. I'm not sure about getting there. That's called uncertainty. I'm going to say, now all of a sudden, the person is completely hijacked all the way across to it. It's the worst case scenario is the snake oil salesperson of the, this guy that would go around and sell this elixir or oil or drink and come in, hey, this is going to take care of this ailment, and it's going to take this. How about this? Will it take care of this? Oh, yes, it takes care of that too. You won't believe the results we've had, but results may vary. Results may vary is an uncertainty narrative. That actually creates dopamine in the bottom. Oh, maybe I could be the one that it works for. Maybe I'm the one that it would work for. Mainly from a testing standpoint, there's a person that did exhibit some benefits, but it was more from the placebo effect than it was from the substance, which is a whole nother challenge is that getting a person into the person's mindset of healing or progress. Really, really tough. So there's really, really a big part of it. And if you did this on the stock market, it's called pump and dump. I'm going to pump information in, and then the stock price goes up, and then I'm going to sell at the top, and then the value crashes back down, and all the people that got pumped on the hype of the thing, the perception and the perspective of this thing being bad or good, are going to get caught. Okay, so, and the SEC has regulations about this. You cannot pump and dump. You cannot hijack a stock price. You cannot take the media and do X, Y, and Z. You can't do that, or otherwise, that's really a big problem.
Isn't it interesting how when it comes to the SEC and stock regulation, there are laws, and that's a big problem, is a whole agency to enforce it. When it comes to the president of the United States pumping up, oh, we're going to have this tax cut and save everybody all this money, it really seemed to be a pump and dump scheme where so many people this past April 15th don't get any refund or owed a lot of money and weren't properly prepared for it because they expected this big tax cut. At the end of the day, that reward wasn't really there for most people.
That's right. It wasn't. In fact, a bunch of people had to pay more, and they were going like, wait. How did I have to pay more? I thought I was going to get something back from the promise. How did I get to pay more? And they're realizing that some of them are not realizing they're going to double down on the bet. They're going to say, wait a minute. Well, it'll take a little while, because watch the narrative. This is going to say, well, the tax breaks have taken effect, but some people might not have experienced it the way. But this next time, as we keep going, the next time, they're all they're doing is just pushing it down, and the responsibility and the accountability is not going to really fall on their shoulders. They're going to look for some form of experience to show up where the person feels guilty. There's a sense of blame that's going to show up, and then a sense of shame, which is really what we're actually heading towards, and this hiking during this hijacking process of truth. It's getting hijacked, and language is the driver, and the way language is formulated is the thing that's doing it. If it's done in marketing, or if it's done in, I should say, when it is done in marketing, when it is done in branding, there is a brand promise. And this brand promise is, this is what we're standing for. We're the good guys. We're the people on the right side of this. Those other people, they're the bad people on their side. We're the good people. They're the bad people. And the brand promise is, if they're in charge, they're going to do all these bad things. And wouldn't it be terrible? See, it's, again, we're back up to perception, perspective, and proportion, the reward, the anticipation, the uncertainty. It is a sequence of language narrative that regrettably most or all of the Democratic candidates have no ability to understand how to use. It's
And
unsettling.
boy, they better go to school quick.
You think?
Yeah, because oh my gosh, I mean, we see this playing out almost every day. I mean, I think that isn't the whole tariff war the same sort of thing where it's China is the bad guy you were just saying, right? And the United States is the good guy.
Right. The tariff. That's right. The tariff war needs to have that hijacking. There is the tariff war is here's what the China narrative was during the campaign, and look at how he's coming back around to recycle it. It's China's bad, China's good. China's bad. Well, there's parts we need China. China's good. Here's the good thing. Here's the North Korea thing. Bad, no, good. Now, yeah, it's like there's these touchstones that he's planting regarding perception and perspective. The perception is here's the way I see it. The perspective is I want you to see my view of it. Don't look at this other view of it. Let's look at my view of it. And the reward is, wouldn't it be great when, wait a minute, and then the anticipation is, oh my gosh, there's some movement on it. Look at what's happened. There's some movement on it. So it's a little unsettling, but you know what? I'm not sure, but those Democrats might get in the way of this. That's uncertainty. See what they're doing? They're obstructing where we're going. The right people, the good people, the people that pray, the people that do this, the people that have these values. Like the ones like me and the ones like you do because you voted for me.
And it seems like, yeah, they changed the narrative by now wanting to investigate the investigators, right? I mean,
Right.
it's going back the other way. The only person that I see actually who's doing a better job than the Democrats of messaging on this and not letting, or at least trying not to let the president hijack truth is George Conway, Kellyanne Conway's husband. I don't know if you've seen that in the media
Yes,
lately.
that's
He's
right.
very vocal
Right.
about that, and calling the president out on everything that he's lying about on a daily basis. And it's very interesting. Yeah, the Democrats are not talking about it.
Yeah.
What about, I mean,
Well,
the
the hard
Democrats
part
aren't
about
talking.
it that
Sorry, go ahead.
well, you're right, because the Democrats, they've been labeled and diagnosed as being this spot. So as soon as they open their mouth, it's easy, they become an easier target. Whereas the Republicans that are the defectors, they could say whatever they want, and they get to be this whole nother level of honesty, because they get to say, listen, this guy is going against all of us, and here's how bad he's doing it. And all the defectors are sitting right in that spot. All of them are going like, we're out of this. We are not doing this anymore. And the courage, they get to speak up and be direct. But meanwhile, currently, with their current message, there's no safe way for a Democrat to get there unless they use some of the languaging tools that I teach. You see, I mean, that's really the problem, is that they don't have the ability to break out of the guilt or the blame or the shame cycle and stare it down and put a spotlight on it. And that's really a big part of what we're going to be talking about today, because a big part of truth is you got to see where the language messaging is coming from, and then be able to look at it and have the right message to counter that message.
Well, can we share an example of that, Bill? Because I'd love to see how you would create that counter narrative, and actually first lay out what one of example of this guilt, blame, or shame that we're seeing right now.
Okay, so let's do a couple of these. If I were to take a look at a Democratic candidate running, and you were asked a very, very difficult question, say this back to me: what makes you different?
What makes you different?
Most of them will fall into either two dead-end narratives, and here they come. First dead-end narrative is, I have a plan that's better.
I
That
hear
is
that all the time. I think I heard that with, I forget who the,
dead-end.
my God, it's just like 22 of them now. It's hard to keep track of who's who.
Yeah,
But
the latest one was Tim Ryan, the guy on Bill Maher.
I remember that Friday night. Yeah.
Yeah, he goes, I have a plan. I'm going like, you're lost.
Yeah.
You're lost. You know, this guy ran on no plan, and you think you're going to get it with a plan? You know, he ran on no plan, and he still doesn't have a plan.
Right.
And there is, because nobody knows what the government does fully, and because they don't, he gets to ignore the entire system. But all the wonderful things that the government does that keeps us safe, that no one knows about. All they know is government bad. Let's make government less than. Meanwhile, scaring geese off of runways so that they don't fly into an engine saves lives. Government's not bad.
Yeah.
They just do things we don't see from a committed safety place. so you don't lose 200 people on a plane because the bird flies into the engine.
Yeah. I remember hearing that as well. Okay. So
see the difference?
yeah.
So what winds up happening is that if the perception and the perspective is that we don't know what government does, therefore it's bad, that all I got to do is proportionalize the bad, and immediately I get to ignore, because that's what's happening. We're ignoring the government. that's who's in charge. Somebody ignoring it, and somebody's just hijacking the truth with the media narrative. So how do you combat this? So that was the one dead end. The one dead end is the I have a plan. The second dead end is the story called People Are Hurting. We're not getting the progress that we would like. In other words, pointing out the pain of somebody is different than standing for a quality that people can get behind. Okay, so let's take the third option. You ready?
Ready.
Ask me the same question.
What do you stand for, Bill?
Makes you different.
Uh-oh. Did you hear me? No.
It sounds like we got frozen. No, it got frozen.
All right.
So let's try that one again.
We'll edit this out. Okay.
Oh,
You hear me now? We're okay?
I can hear you now.
All right. So what do you stand for, Bill?
The first thing is to reestablish mutual respect. And even though the other side isn't respecting us the way we would like, we can stand together as a respectful unit moving forward. The Democrats will stand together for mutual respect, even though the other side is not doing that. Now, look at how your physiology changed as soon as I said what I was standing for. Now, all of a sudden, if anybody crosses the mutual respect line, I'm on it. It's like that's not even close to what mutual respect looks like in America.
You know, this sounds very familiar to me. Last night on the Tonight Show, Pete Buttigieg was being interviewed, and Trump has already tried to label him, and I'm going to forget the name of the character right now because I didn't expect to talk about this, so I didn't have notes. But he labeled him. I forget what the character name is that's on like Mad Magazine. That character, sort of cartoonish like character, and Trump labeled him that character name because he kind of maybe in some ways resembles him. So he's trying to label Pete Buttigieg and bring him down to the level of a comical character and sort of say, don't take him seriously. He's like this guy. And what Pete Buttigieg said that I thought was brilliant was that he said, well, of course, we're trying to raise the level of the conversation in America. And to the extent the president made a literary reference, I think that that's an improvement.
That's a pivot
Yeah.
on actually having a little bit of empathy and Teflon energy. It's like, you want to call me a name, you've got to do a heck of a lot better than that guy. I'm not going to be the character on Mad Magazine. Newman, it's eluding me too. So yeah, I'm not gonna. Oh, so thank you for being able to let me know. Oh, the magazines you read. Now we know the magazines you read. Wow, that's really great. That's an improvement in your narrative. I really appreciate your improving your narrative that you can reference such a real to it, and it's a differentiator because you're able to engage, not afraid of what a person's going to say to you, and you don't go down the road of bureaucracy, which is, I have a system or I have a plan or I have a rule or I'm going to enforce this and we're going to stand for this, and it's like it's not as strong. You've got to get them to do things and engage things differently. So yeah,
I
and
found
that's
it. It's
and
Alfred
well,
E. Newman, Bill. It's Alfred E. Newman.
Alfred, that's it. Newman. Yeah, that's right. Alfred E. Newman. Thank you for finding that.
Yeah, I found that. Sorry, that was important. I should have.
It
I
is
wish I'd.
important.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
is
and I wish
important
I'd
for us.
thought of it ahead of time. I would have had it. So sorry, listeners, for bringing up the name and not knowing the end of it. But so yeah, so the president,
And everybody did.
he's like Alfred E. Newman, and he's trying to label him just like he does everybody, and bring the level of discourse down. But Pete Buttigieg did, to me, he did along the lines of what you were saying a few minutes ago, in that he, raised the level of the conversation, and instead of turning around and calling the president a name and labeling him, he gave a more intelligent and thoughtful response, and he wasn't going down the, well, I have a plan for this and that, so we don't care what the president says, right?
Correct. So that's really important because the shame cycle is an emotional gerbil wheel. What Mayor Pete did was he was a person that stood for something that was more important than the label that was being assigned to him. He stepped into the label and dismantled it, and then backed off and provided an adult response. The shame cycle is a very tragic language strategy you can use on kids, but you will pay for it later. You will pay for it later. If you lose a shame cycle on a kid, they will let you have it. They just will.
Hmm.
And it's an emotional gerbil wheel. And it's easier to assign fault when you're in a blaming and shaming perspective to others, because then you don't have to do any self-accountability, and that is really so unsettling. And regrettably, messaging in America is designed to impact the listener this way. it's only to confirm the belief that my identity is better than another person's identity, resulting in an emotional response. I feel better about being on this team than the negative message that were painted on the other team. Forget about truth. I don't want to be known as being on that team. I don't want to be known as, I don't want to play on that team. I want to play on this other simpler team. It looks simpler, but it's more costly. And so, like, it's a little unsettling to even believe that we could get trapped this way. So, Tom, let's take this example of Trump and Mayor Pete out for a spin on the shame cycle for a second.
Love it. Let's do it.
All right. And so we could pull the curtain back, because a lot of this thing about purchasing truth is you got to pay attention to how something is being messaged. Okay. So let me share my screen, and we could also talk the listeners into this too. What they're seeing, or what we have up on the screen, is a thing called the shame cycle. And there's 4 words. There's a word that's sitting on the top of the screen, and there's a word to the right, word to the left, and word on the bottom. So there's the 4 words. The first word is the word control. A controlling sentence or phrase is usually where a label comes in, or a diagnosis. This Mayor Pete, can you believe it? And then he makes fun of his last name. What do they call him? Mayor Pete.
Yeah, how do you say his name?
Edge. He's trying to minimize or disrespect another human being's name. My name is better than his name. Trump. You can't even say boot edge, and he's trying to do that. What that does, that's called a controlling narrative. That's the word at the top, is the word control.
He's trying to make it sound like a stutter, or somebody, you're going to sound silly when you say his name. You remember when he made fun of that New York Times, I think, columnist who was handicapped and had speech impairment.
That's right.
But Trump is very comfortable belittling people for things like that.
Very comfortable in the control position. And then what winds up happening, and he's familiar with pulling the levers. He just doesn't know how. He just doesn't know the cost. He knows he gets the rewards from it. He doesn't know that the long-term cost is that right now people are taking his name off of his buildings. Right now, I just saw a person pulling Trump's name off of one of his resorts. They were taking a crowbar to his name off of.
You mean like vandalism? They were
no, not vandalism.
No. So they had the right to do it. They didn't want to be associated with his name.
Whatever, they had the right to do it. They just say, no one's coming to our hotel anymore.
Wow.
No one's coming to our resort hotel on a beach. I think it was one in Miami, because I had driven by it while I was down there, and I was kind of like, oh my gosh, that's the one in Miami, isn't it? I think it is. And they were prying the name Trump off of Ocean Resort in Miami, and so all of a sudden it's like, well, what's going on there? What happens is, as soon as somebody says a control narrative, there's an arrow, for those that are just listening audio wise, there is an arrow coming down to the bottom word called release. Release is, this person is in a place of helplessness because they can't do anything with the label I just called them. It's like, how is Mayor Pete going to argue with Alfred E. Newman? How are you going to argue with that? How are you going to argue with it? The only way to do it is to step into it. Hey, I'm glad Trump is becoming more literal. He's actually reading a magazine now. And he can have fun with this right now. He can actually go like, gosh, did you hear that? It's really great that he's reading again. Gosh, you know what magazine again? Oh, wow, maybe he could bring some of those ideas into government. He could push into it and dissolve the shame cycle.
I thought it was brilliant. I really did.
Yeah. I mean, Hillary could have done the same thing. Oh, Crooked Hillary, thank you so much for that wonderful label. Let's go ahead and see about that label as Crooked Hillary. Well, I guess I could bend in a crooked way. Well, I guess I could bend my fingers and they could look crooked. Gosh, but I'm not really sure. Notice I'm minimalizing the label.
Right.
I'm changing the proportion of the label because she didn't reduce the proportionality of her emails and what was in it. I hope they find the 3,000 emails, you know, the missing emails. It's like, oh my gosh, right? So now when a person tries to explain against a controlling narrative, it just gives the power back to the person. Now I've got an arrow coming up, and now the person then is stuck in a narrative between control, release, and you cannot win in that space. It's exhausting. It's draining. It causes polarization. That's what the shame cycle does. Now, here's what the other two words are on the screen. On the left side, the word submit is there. And on the right side, the word is rebel against there. So now all of a sudden, I've got to submit for a second, and then I've got to rebel or fight against. Mayor Pete did not fight the label.
Right.
He observed the label, stepped into the label, made the proportion of the label smaller, and turned the label back into an advantage. Oh, Trump is learning how to read. Just see, I'm really glad his literal discourse is getting better. I'm glad we're upping our conversation right now. Now, all of a sudden, he's not getting sucked into the vortex of a thing called a shame experience or a shame narrative. When a person has done a lot of terrible things, when a family has done a lot of terrible things, there is this circling around the shaming experience of the terrible thing that person has done, or even the trauma that person went through. And what happens is that this vortex around shame takes place. There's a control sentence. There's a rebellion sentence. There is a release sentence. There's a submit sentence. There's a control sentence. And what happens is, that happened to every Republican that went up against Trump. He took them in here, and they had no languaging skills to get out.
Even though they were, a lot of them, tremendously more experienced than Trump at governing, at politics, and all these things, that they allowed a newbie to come in here and get them. It's like they got flushed. I'm seeing this as, like you said, a vortex. I'm seeing it like the swirl in a toilet. You just get flushed.
Oh my gosh, it is because as soon as it's like you don't want to get in the toilet and play with the shit when you're in there. You want I'm sorry for the sorry.
Oh my gosh.
It is the thing. And the language and the languaging structure then, Tom, is that we can watch this in all levels of our society. Control, rebellion, release, submit. Let's do some visual examples and some verbal examples. Okay.
Okay.
And let's take something easy. Let's take something like an addiction, because addiction is really hard, because addiction and the shame cycle play off of each other.
Okay.
All right. And both of them, the chemical and the language, work against the individual. Let me say it again. The language and the chemical work against the individual, because the person in its emotional state doesn't know how to deal with their own thoughts. So shame regarding language and thoughts or events is something that is, I don't know how to talk about this difficult thing that happened to me. And I don't know how to deal with proportionalizing it. I just don't. And I don't know how to let it go. My body wants to keep amplifying it. And that's what the shame cycle does. All right. So let's use somebody that is drinking more alcohol than their body would like. Let's just do that one. So a person that's drinking more alcohol than their body would like, in their first controlling sentence off of getting sober, they might say, I will never do that again, I promise. That is a controlling sentence. If the person uses never or always, should or shouldn't, can't, they are stuck in a controlling narrative. And eventually what's going to happen is that they'll say the next sentence, just this once. Do you hear the rebellion?
I do.
They're rebelling against their own sentence because they want access to choice. Then once they do that, it drives them around past the just this once to how could I have? Because now they're waking up the next day with a hangover. And how could I have? The person, the loved one that is looking at them going like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you? That's a controlling sentence. Notice that what's wrong with you and how could I have are opposite each other. The news media and Trump are stuck in a shame cycle, and they don't know it.
Wow.
They don't, because then it's, well, the label, Trump's a narcissist. See, I inserted that. That's a submit sentence. Or I'm an alcoholic. That is a submit sentence. If somebody said, I'm sorry, when somebody apologizes, a little bit of them is taking a shame for the bad thing that they did. That's problematic. Because as soon as someone says, I'm sorry, they then will have to say, I'll never do that again. And now we're stuck in the cycle all over again. I'll never do that again, I promise. You know what? I can handle this. It's just a wedding. I can have a little champagne. I don't want to be left out. All of those are rebellion sentences. It's my own life. Whatever. Those are all releasing sentences that gives the permission for the person to do a bad thing or something that's against their interest. And then they get to get the shame on the back end. You know, what's wrong with me? Or I have no discipline. All right. So what are you catching from this? Because can you see immediately we're really exhausted already? I know that I am a little bit, but yeesh.
Yeah, it seems like it just be a never-ending cycle, and if you don't know what to say or how to handle it, you're stuck.
Yeah, yeah, and welcome to the 2006 campaign. You know, none of them knew how to handle it. They all got stuck.
The 2016, you mean? Yeah,
2016.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, 2016.
So,
Thank you for
so
correcting me.
sorry. Yeah, I know it's a picky detail. I'm sorry. I
I
shouldn't do
appreciate
that.
that. No, no,
Well,
no, it's
I
good.
that's
No, all right.
annoying
Stay.
sometimes.
No, no. The need for truth is really important.
All
Please
right. Well,
stay after truth. I'm interested in facts. Oh, by the way, notice you said I'm sorry. It's a thing. No, Tom. No, no, sorry. There's no need to apologize. Tom, I really want to celebrate the detail and the accuracy that you just contributed when I just made a minor mistake. And guess what? I feel okay about it because it just came out the way it did. It's that look at you and I just step back. I step back and look at the humor. No judgment.
yeah.
You're just going like, hey, Bill, I'm correcting a detail. And you know what? That's an adult narrative where I'm not going to get stuck. My self-worth is not going to get stuck because shame protects a weak self-worth. Say it back to me. Shame protects.
Shame protects a weak self-worth.
It does. It does. It can protect it.
Wow. Well,
Because,
thank you for your empathy on that because I was feeling a little guilty that I was correcting you. So that's great. Well, so let's talk about though. So what, and I want to come back to the news media in a second because I think
sure.
it's important to bring some to illuminate that a little bit. But so let's talk about now that we have this slide on the screen. And if you're listening just to the podcast, listeners, I highly recommend you go to the blog post for this episode and check out this slide and or look at the video because this is very illuminating. So when Mayor Pete Buttigieg said to Jimmy Fallon, well, we want to raise the discourse of our conversation in this country. So, I'm glad that the president picked a literary reference because that's a step in the right direction, and I'm paraphrasing. That's not the exact quote, but that was the message.
Yes.
Where did his path on this chart go? Did he move away from it entirely?
Yes. He had moved away from the chart and he took a half a step back from the chart, observed the strategy and language, and reframed the controlling narrative that the label, because it would have been so easy and he would have been in a mudslinging match with, well, it wasn't I'm not that guy, the things I'm saying are not cartoonish, well, I'm not this,
Or if he
I
said, well, that just shows how childish the president is because
right,
he
he's
can't
not.
have a real conversation about the issues, right?
That's right. That's right. If all of a sudden, guess what? That's a blame narrative, and blame's just another floating piece of stuff inside this toilet. Guilt and blame are all circling around shame. They're floating pieces of toilet paper. If we want to push on the metaphor a little more here, and you
Well,
just got to observe it. You got to observe it. It's like, I'm not getting in there. I'm gonna go like, yeah, I guess somebody could get stuck in that swirl, but I'm not going to get stuck in
yeah,
this.
I mean, you can call it the toilet, you could call it the gutter. I mean, he stayed out of what I think
Stayed out of it.
metaphorically a lot of people think is the gutter, right?
Yeah, and he could now all of a sudden when when Trump repeats this same label, Trump looks like the guy in there with no literary consciousness. It's like, oh my gosh, he just thinks, and Pete can actually just go, stay with, the literary metaphor. And I'm really glad he's reading today. It's like, gosh, I'm really glad he's using that magazine as a point of reference. Maybe he can find a policy in two in there. He just
Yeah.
observe it. He just stay in the observation space. And humor is an important spotlight regarding shame because there's a lot of pain that is being created inside this presidency. And even the people that are voting for him don't know the level of pain that's coming in their direction over the next 4 years that has to be cleaned up.
Yeah.
It's hijacking it in such a way, to meet the needs of the few ahead of the needs of the many. I mean, that's really what's going on. That's what the shame cycle does, is provides cover for clever strategists and linguists to, get over this.
Well,
And
so how does the news media get stuck in this cycle, and they, flush themselves probably a lot? How can they break out of it? Can we think of an example to share about that?
yeah, there's like 2 years worth of examples, of how they're getting stuck in there, because they get stuck trying to use facts to combat shame, and you cannot use facts to combat shame. You can't.
Even if the facts are on your side, right?
Even if they're on side, even if they're monumental, you can't use shame. You can't. Facts have no ability to stand up to a shaming narrative. The only thing that you can use is as a narrative of observation, coupled with a language of compassionate for the person that's using the shame. So it might sound like this. If Rudy Giuliani gets on. So, Mr. Mayor, I guess you're having a good thought. You're having some thoughts that going to the Ukraine would be a really good idea for Americans to start depending on other foreign agencies rather than our own. Is that what you're recommending?
Wow.
Now, that is putting a spotlight on his narrative. So it sounds like you're encouraging Americans to go outside to other foreign sources because you would like us not to trust the agencies that are with us. Is that what you'd like us not to do? Holy crap.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm taking and looking at that narrative and not letting it hijack it. So you would like us to look at it in that, and you have some thoughts about Biden and his son and oil, and you're looking to start a messaging about some negative elements. And I feel curious, would you be willing to disclose the fact or the resource so that we can help support you with the fact or the resource that you have in your hand?
Oh my gosh, he never would do that. He was like,
So
"Oh, well, many people have said this."
Oh, so you would like us to trust word of mouth. Is that what you'd like us to trust? I think in evidence, what we'd like to do is have something hard, because the news media would like to cover facts, because we don't want to be called fake news anymore. So we would like to work off the evidence that you have so we can help promote your idea.
Wow.
So the shaming narrative is they're taking and looking to proportionalize an illusion and make the illusion bigger. There's something wrong with. See, even Joe Biden didn't step into Creepy Joe well enough. Even his handlers didn't help him with his language.
Creepy Joe, and now what is it? Sleepy Joe. Isn't that the other one?
Sleepy Joe, right. You got to step into that.
I know.
You got to step into that. You can't let him. You got to step into it, I guess. Gosh, I'm guessing, I guess he's really interested, and maybe, he's, gosh, it sounds like that, he is really requesting that I ask permission from women before I touch them and kiss them and go in them. And is that what he was requesting? I guess the president has some great experiences, and maybe he can teach me a thing or two about how to best treat women.
Much better.
Much better. You got to take them on. See, shame doesn't do very well when you shut a spotlight on it. It doesn't do very well when you accurately proportionalize it. And there are people that do very terrible things, but if we're getting hijacked by identity, or good versus bad, or one party versus another party, or government bad good, it's like we are not in alignment with the perspective. And it's other countries that have more suppression of their people get away with this all the time because they control the media messages.
Well, and certainly that's what Trump's trying to do, is control
Yes.
the media message, and he does a pretty good job of it, even though he doesn't own the media. But let's just take one more little example. Like, for instance, Trump keeps claiming the Mueller report was a complete and total exoneration, no collusion, no obstruction. And of course, the media keeps saying, well, no, it wasn't a complete exoneration. And no, well, there is evidence of obstruction. They're arguing it on the facts.
They are, and they're getting their ass whipped is what they're doing.
And so what should a good media anchor say? What should the media do that would be more effective?
The president would like to the president is mentioning that there is no collusion, and he's also mentioning that collusion is the big deal, and he's also mentioning that that there was some minimal amount of obstruction. Here's the turn. You got to be ready for this. Well, it's very frustrating and disheartening that the president would promote something that's not in alignment with truth. Truth is that if this was in front of a judge, regrettably, a judge would not agree with what the president is saying right now. So notice how vulnerability and humility came in with my narrative.
Right.
It's like, he's trying to use a control thing in order to get us, or the truth tellers, to bite on the bait in the water. Wait a minute, the facts are here. No, the facts never stand up to shame, because the person is so entrenched in protecting their legacy, their respect, their thing, their identity.
Wow.
And so when President Reagan and his administration was caught in the Iran Contra ideal thing, and the weapons that were sold to rebels, and how the funds were diverted, and that was caught. He went into a place of and took one for the team by releasing and say, I didn't know anything about it, and then going into a submit position saying, people didn't tell me about this. They say it's true, but it's hard to believe that that's the way this thing happened under my watch. He didn't say it that way. But what happened is he took on the shame to put cover for his own identity and his own respect. These other people were bad, Oliver North and all the different other people that got caught and got convicted and went to jail. And they now have to pay for that by going to jail. And those people are are going to have to fall on the sword too. So Oliver North takes one for the team. Reagan takes one for the Republican team, because that's what he did. He took one for the team. And they literally covered the shame cycle. And the rest of America felt a little bit better because they took one for the team. And they and the gun law and there was no reparations. There was no reparations to all the people that got killed because of that, what they did, as well as the reparation, as well as what needed to be done, from a governmental standpoint to have the oversight that was necessary. So, see, regulations is to really catch people from, rebelling. The another word for rebellion is called crook, or I'm going to steal something, whereas I'm going to meet my need for choice at the other people's expense. So authoritarians need this. They use the shame cycle all the time. All you got to do is listen to it. There's always some enemy that we're better than, that need to be suppressed, because we want to choose to do whatever we want to do for our benefit at the expense of others. So, I mean, yeah, anyway, so the shame cycle is really, really very, very dangerous. And you can see how blame and guilt get mixed into this. The blame is like a control narrative. The guilt is, how could you mean I'm guilty? I'm not guilty of this. See, that's kind of a release narrative. Oh, I guess I am guilty. I have to submit to that.
But what I think is counterintuitive,
yeah, the counterintuitive part of it, the thing that's actually, opposite of that, is really very important to talk about.
Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna, guys, edit a little bit here because I was having trouble speaking. What's counterintuitive is that if you are trying to battle this cycle, you can't just come out and present the facts. And I've seen Bill Maher a number of times in his show over the years when he's frustrated with what somebody on the panel is saying, and he says, but we have these things called facts, and he's just trying to say it louder and emphasize it so people will care.
Right.
But they don't, and that's not the most effective way.
It isn't. No, regrettably, even though he's right, it's not helpful. So he's right. It's not helpful. It's not helpful to point it out. I mean, it is kind of, sort of, like, got to observe it. But really, what really blows up shame and blows up their narrative is calling them on it when they do it. So, for example, if a panelist says the sentence, which has happened multiple times on his show, no collusion, some obstruction, the person needs to be called out when they do that. It might sound like this. Listen, I really appreciate what you're trying to do, is trying to protect the president at this time. And it sounds like you really want to protect him by saying no collusion and no obstruction. But really, what truth looks like to me is that this is an obstruction piece. And here's the one piece. And then you land whatever piece of obstruction. If this happens, then this happens. And then that shaming thing that they did, called propaganda, you get to actually look at. The shame is an empty promise of progress. Isn't that a weird thing? Shame is an empty promise of progress. I'll never drink again, I promise, is an empty narrative towards progress. Because as soon as someone apologizes, there's a controlling sentence that's coming next. So you need to turn down and reframe an apology to a disappointment, a miss, a mistake, so that shame doesn't suck you into the narrative that this person has just enlisted you to participate in. They're hijacked.
They're pulling the levers on you. It's the wizard all over again.
It's the wizard all over again. So this is really, really significant. And regrettably, media doesn't have a handle on this very well. They're trying to fight shame with truth, and it doesn't work that well.
Wow.
You can fight it by shining a light on it. You can fighting it by putting it in proportion. Yeah. So the president would like us to believe this, but at the same time, the truth that he's trying to promote is not in alignment with the truth that actually Mueller showed. It's like the truth is not in alignment. And gosh, the president is doing his best to communicate his version of truth. And, it's not in alignment with the scope and the extent of how this has shown up. You see, it's difficult because the proportionality and the repetition that it takes to get somebody and a country on the shame cycle comes tweet after tweet after tweet. Every tweet has a controlling narrative, has a rebelling narrative, has a submitting narrative somebody else has to submit, a releasing narrative. Every tweet has 1 or 2 or 3, 4, and if you watch multiple tweets, all of them are there. Well, we're really not sure. Well, we'll have to see if the Dems will let us do it. It's like, letting us do what? Steal? Lie? Rebel against police officers? What?
Wow.
It's really different, Tom.
That's
very, very different.
This has been so illuminating, Bill, really. I mean, this cycle. Yeah. And again, listeners, if you haven't seen this, you got to check out the video or check out the slides on the blog post. Amazing. Thank you, Bill. I really, that helped me understand a lot more about this shame, blame, and guilt cycles and how truth gets hijacked. And that really helps me understand a lot better of how Trump has succeeded here.
And the main thing, Tom, and we'll get into this next time, is to really get into a place where we can look at this from both to stop mind reading and to also to move into a place of emotional sobriety. Those are the two next pieces of truth. And you can imagine what it would be like is to have an emotionally sober response to a shame cycle narrative. Emotionally sober, you don't want to take and fight the battle, in this way. You want to fight the battle in a way that is going to help move the narrative in a healthy way. And, Mayor Pete gave an emotionally sober response to being called Alfred E. Newman. Well, seems like he's got a label.
Yeah.
Seems like he's trying to control a little bit here. And gosh, I'm really glad that he's reading some literature.
It was brilliant. He didn't take the bait, is what he didn't do.
And that's emotionally sober response. And that's the next thing we'll get into is how do you have emotional sober response and really stare the shame cycle down.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. I look forward to that.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Tom. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to this Purchasing Truth podcast. We trust that you have enjoyed this engaging and thought-provoking conversation. Our hope is that you've received value, found clarity, and broadened your truth perspective in this episode. If you did, leave us a review or visit our website, purchasingtruth.com. Join us again for another informative and content-rich discussion here at the Purchasing Truth podcast. Don't just accept whatever information comes your way. Join the discussion. Discover your own voice. Purchase your own truth.